Why are Fords crap? Is it the 6-liter turbocharged diesel engine that blows head gaskets like it's going out of style? Or is it the 2.7-liter twin-turbo V6 eco-turd engine that's dropping valves? Or F-150 undercarriage getting ripped apart because of the drive shaft? Or is it the infamous Ford Exploder that chokes people out because of exhaust fumes? Or the infamous Ford Focus with the DCT, that's the powder shift transmission, double clutch that dries up, lurches, jerks, and costs thousands of dollars to fix. Also can't forget the infamous Pinto that would catastrophically blow up because of a rear end collision at a relatively low speed just because the tank was installed outside of the chassis. I mean, even this rock star couldn't hold a candle to the 5.4-liter 3-valve brutal V8 engine from many years ago. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with these vehicles, some of which ABS issues, the flex hose on the exhaust system, of course. Blind spot is a very challenging conversation here. As you can see, it's very difficult to see out of some of these vehicles, and that's causing a lot of troubles. We also can't forget about the lurky gearbox. That's lots of troubles. Timing issues, poor fuel economy. This vehicle is a mess on wheels. Dumpster fire, as a matter of fact. But what's really problematic is what's under the hood here. Really, it's under the hood where you're having the big issues. That engine, 1 liter, is basically throwaway. Why is that? Well, have you ever heard of oil pumps? The oil is the product that needs to lubricate the engine. Most oil pumps are driven by gears because it's robust. This is driven by a belt. Yes, that belt breaks. Literally, this thing will wear out. Boom, 60, 70,000 miles, this engine is blown apart to bits. Front seats, there's issues with the fastening as well as ABS lights seem to be a frequent problem, as is the rear tailgate. It seems to kind of work sometimes and other times it decides to do it on its own. That's right, this Ford EcoSport is an eco mess. One that definitely is one of the highlights for Ford and clearly defines the problematic reputation of the Ford as a brand. But I've got another few questions that some viewers have been asking. So Parmeet Singh actually asked the question, what do I think about the Subaru WRX STI and are they reliable? What do I think? Well, here we have an example of a beautiful STI and I want to show you that. The STI has the 2.5-liter turbo 4-cylinder engine. Of course, it has the great little vents on there, and of course the STI has some other finishings. You notice the big wing on the back, and it is definitely race inspired, rally race inspired. I personally think they're great. They're fun to drive. They definitely have enough giddy up and go with over 300 horsepower, but are they reliable? Well, the bottom line is yes and no. If you buy an earlier model, an EJ engine powered unit, ringlands, there's problems with that. There can be huge issues. Of course, the biggest issues come with neglect, poor or lack of proper oil changes, and overboosting. So if you're highly modifying your early generation STI, you might have some issues. If you're going with a later model, for example, after 2018, that's when they're starting to see more durability, better engines after 2015 in general. So go with the newest and the latest and greatest. And if you're going to buy a used one, definitely make sure it's not modified, it's been well serviced, and it's been very much babied and looked after. They're hard to find, but those are the gems. Other than that, they're quite reliable. Subaru has a great reputation, and their Foresters and other models generally have that solid reputation for durability. This WRX and the STIs can as well. They've just got to make sure you find one that's well maintained. So Les Lethal actually asked the question about the Kia engines, and are they good now that once they've actually been replaced, and a lot of people know why they've been replaced, rod bearings. Some of the machining, the metallics left inside the cooling passages meant that they were unreliable, and some of them would burn or just start rod knocking. So yes, in fact, I would say generally most of them are better after they've been replaced, largely because part of the problem was quality control and cleaning of those orifices. Get a new engine, you're probably fine. And so another great question from Santosh, who actually asked if the vehicle is only driven 5,000 kilometers a year, and maybe the vehicle manufacturer says I can get away with 15,000 kilometers or about 10,000 miles on an oil service, should I still do it once a year or just follow the routine of what the manufacturer says? Well, that's a great question. Obviously, what we have over here is an oil service bay. They're busy for a reason, but they're not busy enough in my opinion, because you look under the hood here and an engine like this is dirty, but it's dirty because it's been around a long time. It's lasting, it's surviving because I look after it. So the bottom line is, yes, Santosh, change it at least once yearly. The reason I say that is this is a question that a lot of people get, kind of hung up on, and the manufacturer says only do it so often. A lot of the reason for that is because manufacturers have these fixed service intervals. Yes, eventually it becomes yours, but a lot of these are maintenance programs that they're selling people. And then people get into that, they take their vehicle in for the maintenance service programs. Those programs are only doing it a minimum number of times just to adhere to the warranty specs. And basically all that is a marketing scheme for a lot of these manufacturers. Now, yes, of course, do you need to change it every 3,000 miles? Maybe not that frequently, but I personally believe 5,000 to 7,000 miles is a sweet spot if you're using synthetic. If you're using Dino oil, it's a lot less. But I have always practiced change the oil minimum once a year, even if you don't exceed the mileage. And I can honestly tell you what that does is smaller, more frequent drives ends up resulting in more corrosion within the engine. The rod bearings, oil pumps, parts like that take a toll because there's more acids in the engine. Smaller, shorter trips, less warm-up time, so the vehicle doesn't get fully warmed up, usually means that what you can develop is moisture in there and acids, and the pH levels are off and it creates corrosion inside the engine. So if the vehicle sits a lot, even if you're not getting the miles, I highly, strongly suggest that you do your oil services much more frequently. It's just as important if it's sitting as if it's being used. The question as well about 4-cylinder versus V8s. Often V8s are a replication of 2 4-cylinder engines running side by each. So often the RPMs are the same. It just means you're getting more torque, more stroke out of that turning of an RPM. Yeah, and of course you often have to rev up a little harder to get that momentum and inertia get going. But the reality is a lot of the wearing parts are still turning at the same kind of velocity, especially V8s and 4-cylinder engines. So the bottom line is wear and tear can exist no matter what type of engine you have. The higher you rev the engine, naturally, the more wear and tear you're going to see and impose. But the bottom line is get those oil services done. Let's just do some basic math. So let's just say you have a high-end vehicle, say a Jaguar, a BMW, an Audi, and it costs you $200 per oil service. If it costs you $200, you do that twice a year, that's gonna cost you $400 a year if you do it 2 a year. That's excessive for most people. So $400 a year, that becomes what? $4,000 in 10 years? 10 years is a long period of time to own your vehicle. I don't know too many people who own it that long. So it's $4,000 in 10 years if you do it twice a year on an expensive vehicle. I mean, it's always typically going to be a lot less than that for most other vehicles. So $4,000 in 10 years. Now add that to the cost of a replacement engine. If you're not doing proper oil services and you blow an engine, and it's not hard to do that in modern day engines with variable valve timing and some of the other pieces and bits that they have in there, these high-strung turbocharged engines do have a lot more demand on the oiling. If you don't do enough oiling and you blow an engine, most modern day engines are going to cost you anywhere $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, $20,000, even more if you're buying a car like a BMW. So an engine is a very expensive piece. Oil is cheap. So that's the way I like to sell it. Oil is a relatively easy way to mitigate blown engines, and as a result, definitely do more than less. Thanks, Santosh. Great question, because that will help your engine last forever. And Mr. Omer Beg actually asked, what's that on your chin? If you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll probably see. Yeah, I've got this little fur bag down here, and some people reference it and call it all kinds of things, but it's basically something I grew. I had some facial hair once, and then I trimmed it off, and I left that on there. And actually, the wife loved it a lot. So much, in fact, she said, why don't you leave that on for a while? And so I just sort of adopted it. And so it's just a little bit of fuzz down there, and I sort of keep that trimmed up. What do you guys think? Drop the comments section down below. I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Get your merch at Exotic Car Play Place under Get Our Gear. You're going to love it. Join the ECPP community.